Hello, this is John with Theology Ed. This is part 15 of the iPet Go 2 Explained series. In this video, we're going to discuss a few really interesting and I think important things. First, we're going to look at a new discovery someone has made in the calendar that confirms what we've already been seeing there and also gives us more information, which is really interesting. In particular, one commenter mentioned to me, his name is Student 129, that there is a map in the calendar, and I think he's right, and I'm going to show you that. That will help us pinpoint locations a bit more closely and also help us clarify the timeline and even align it with plausible interpretation of a biblical text from Daniel, which I'll also look at. Then, in addition to that, we're going to go back to the tank scene, which we discussed last time. Last time we focused on the fact that we have an annular eclipse here. That's the June 21st annular eclipse in Cancer, which also has a hexagram in here made up of two trigrams, one trigram being the swamp trigram and the other trigram being the fire trigram. So we have a swamp fire trigram, if you want to call it that, which is the skinning or revolution hexagram in Chinese divination that is meaningful for reasons that I explained in the previous video. We also looked at last time the annular, or not the annular eclipse, just an eclipse on his finger, on Skullduggery's finger, represented by the diamond ring. The total eclipse has the diamond ring effect. And we discussed that this is in Sagittarius. Notice that he's looking like an archer pulling back a bow, ready to release it. When he releases, he fires off his party blower. We discussed Sagittarius and that. We also discussed how the fireworks are probably related to a Chinese New Year event. Now, that means I did not discuss a lot of things in that scene, right? It means we didn't discuss the ribs, which were clearly in a landscape that looks like we're inside the cavity of a chest. So a chest cavity. We have lights on these tanks. We have a column of 5 tanks. A 6th tank is coming in, but we don't ever see the light there. We have the girl. We have not identified her nationality or what she is representing, whether it's her nationality or she's representing nationalities. We haven't discussed that. We haven't mentioned anything about the flag. Okay, we haven't discussed possible interpretation of the fireworks related to the pandemic and the virus. So there are quite a few things that we haven't discussed yet that we still need to discuss to tie up some loose ends with the tank scene. And these are going to be enlightening in order to understand current events because, as it turns out, we can identify what the plan is for this date, the June 21st through July 5th date, I believe, in relation to the East, China, okay? And I'm going to go ahead and show you what that is and how they're already beginning it right now. So we're going to see that current events are already tying in, and that gives us additional confirmation that we're right. This is the 2020 calendar. I think that's beyond dispute at this point. We already have the March 31st or March 11th pandemic declaration here, which locked up the world. We're seeing it loosen up a little bit, just like the calendar seems to show, with the barbed wire becoming less confining for a while, which we can expect it to become worse towards the end of the year. Then we also have, as we're leading up to June, we're going to see some things happening here. What I'll show is that the eclipse date to the buck moon, which is represented in this annular eclipse with China or an Asian power coming against a protester, that actually is already being prepared, and I'll explain that. Okay, so now let's look at this scene again, because first I want to show you that we have a map in here. See the dog? This is supposed to represent, I say that this is a hunting dog, and I believe that's right, because we have the hunter's moon, and this is exactly where we'd expect that to be. However, student 12, number 9, really great observation. Thank you for making that observation. I appreciate when people make observations or make their comments below and say, I think I see this. Sometimes we're right, sometimes we're wrong, and we just need to throw it out there. But often these comments have really, they sort of changed my whole perspective on things or help clarify things for me, which allows us all to understand things a little better because we can share ideas and improve our understanding of the video together. So thank you very much for that. So anyways, he saw Palestine in here, and he's right. Let me show you a map of Palestine. Okay, so here's Israel, Gaza Strip, West Bank, Golan Heights, and you see that this is the Israel and the occupied territories, okay? If you go over here, I cut it out, and I laid it next to our gap between the various months at the end of the year. So September through December, all are touching this. And that's Israel in there. Okay, if you look, there it is. Now we have an opening up here that's wider. That would be like the Mediterranean, and that's fine. I think they're just trying to fit it in there with the way the heads are, and also this all gives you the dog look a little better. But we still have clearly defined. This line goes up to the point where it turns. Actually, I probably should have put that a little lower so it matches up better. But if you look closely, if you go down here, you follow it up at the point we get here to the turn, that's our turn. When we go up this way, we get the nose where we have the nose. It's lined up. There's even similar curvature here. Okay. And so this is a representation of this region. This is a map. And what that tells us is, first off, yes, this is our Middle East conflict period. And it's important that they have Palestine in here at this point, because if you're going to have a Middle East conflict that's anything more than a very minor one, it's almost sure to include Israel in some way, shape, or form. Either Israel as an aggressor or Israel being attacked. So, for example, if the United States is involved in a war in the Middle East and somehow an active hot war in the Middle East, it's unlikely that the nations there are going to be able to strike directly in the United States. Okay, they're not going to be able to fire a missile that reaches the United States from, for example, Iran or Syria. However, they will be able to strike at allies of the United States. And of course, Israel is the most famous ally of the United States in that region. And so they'll be attacked, just like in the Gulf War. These sorts of things. And Israel is likely to retaliate or become active in the war. And we don't know exactly how it all is going to play out. But if you have a major crisis in the Middle East, this is what you'd expect. You'd expect to see Palestine, Israel involved in it. Okay? And that's what they have here depicted at this point where we're already seeing conflict arise, where I've suggested. Because if you look at the heads, you got July, the birth. August, he's just hanging out back there. I really can't see him very well. September looks down, but October, November, that's where the heads clash and things really change. November's totally knocked out. His hand is dangling. He looks unconscious. He's got a black eye or beaten in eye. His mouth is shut. He's been silenced. And then December, he's back under an intense lockdown. He can't even hardly get up. It looks like, just like in April. But even worse, he's got a huge wound to his head. He's been hit. The crater has happened. He's been attacked in some major way. And so this period is where I would expect to see the worst of the conflict. And there it is, the map. So that's confirmation. That also should make us, well, chronologically, it puts the Middle East war before the tank scene, the second part of the tank scene with the nuclear blast. So when in the tank scene, when he blows the party blower at her nuclear cheek, so there she is. She's got her no nuclear sign here and the heart. But Skullduggery, who's got his upside down heart, blows his party blower directly at the no nuclear sign, saying, she's saying, I want peace and no nuclear conflict. And he says with his upside down heart, no love. You don't get the peace and love you want. You're going to get the nuclear war you don't want. And when that happens, that has to be at Sagittarius or after, related to the New Year's types of time. When that happens, that's really interesting. That will be after the Middle East conflict, or at least this phase of the Middle East conflict. And that lines up pretty well with Scripture. When we look at Daniel chapter 11, now, of course, these people can plan whatever they want. It doesn't mean it's going to happen. They're just people. And if they were to make plans that weren't scriptural, it's not going to happen. If it's not going to align with biblical prophecy, it's not going to happen, period. And so we can take that for granted. But when it does line up as a possible match, then it's worth noting, I think. And in this case, when we look at Daniel chapter 11, we see a passage that's about the time of the end and the desolating ruler and power and what's going on with respect to him in the Middle East. And it says, he shall enter into the glorious land. At the time of the end, he shall enter into the glorious land. That's, of course, going to be the Palestinian area of Palestine where Israel is right now. He shall enter into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown. So many countries are going to be overthrown by this desolating power. But they shall escape out of his hand, even Edom and Moab and the chief of the children of Ammon. Think the area, the region to the east of Israel, the immediate east of Israel, Jordan, for example. He shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape, but he shall have power over the treasures of gold and of silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps. Okay, so he's gaining control of the region and its resources. If you look at that, that's how I understand it, right? He shall have power over the treasures of gold and of silver and all the precious things of North Africa, basically. Egypt, the Libyans, and the Ethiopians. So here's Egypt, here's Libya. The Ethiopians are going to be using the ancient way of using the term. Everything south of Egypt with darker skinned people was Ethiopia. Okay, and so you're looking at Sudan, Ethiopia, this region of Africa. So North Africa is being used for its resources. This has already happened in many ways, right? For example, Libya, when Gaddafi was overthrown, the rebels, the first thing they did supposedly was set up a central bank, because everybody knows when rebels take over a country, the first thing they like to do is set up their own central bank. No, obviously not. What this is all about is about the West controlling the banking system and banking interest in order to gain wealth from it. Gaddafi wasn't falling in line, and so they removed him and set up a central bank. Now, so they're gaining the wealth, but this is the sort of thing that will probably continue and be something that accelerates, this fall or winter, and he's going to have a lot of success. The West is going to do this pretty quickly and efficiently, probably. Okay, so he's going to have success. That's what this passage is saying. But when he's had success in the Middle East, what happens? Tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. News, tidings. So news out of the east, so either Iran or go further east, China, and out of the north, Turkey or Russia. These are the most common countries or regions that traditional or interpreters have traditionally assigned to the north and the east. They say, the north is going to be Russia or Turkey, and the east is going to be Iran or China, these powers. Okay? And so he's going to get news out of China and Russia probably that is going to trouble him. And this is when he goes crazy and starts destroying. He says, therefore, he shall go forth with great fury to destroy and utterly to make away many. And he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. None shall help him, because even though he's had success in all these plans and wars and conflicts, Christ is going to destroy him in an act that is unexpected to even them. Okay? And so he loses. But he doesn't lose up till that point. Up till that point, he's doing he is having an effective campaign in the Middle East. And he also, when he hears this news out of the north and the east, and he goes with great fury to destroy, he apparently effectively destroys. And after that, he goes and he looks like he's settling in, but Christ deals with him. So that chronology that you have there is what? It is exactly what we're seeing here. We have war, Middle East, more control, success there in the Middle East. After he's sort of settled in and has control, what happens? He hears news from the east and the north, let's say Russia, China, maybe Iran, maybe even Turkey, but these countries. He hears news out of there, and then we get the party blower and nukes. And that is the chronology of this video as well. Okay, that I think is noteworthy and worth observing. So that's interesting so far. So let's return to the tank scene. In the tank scene, we have, of course, tanks coming. And this is reminiscent of the Tiananmen Square massacre and the famous photograph the day after on June 5th when the tanks were leaving and that courageous guy stood in front of them and was blocking them. And apparently, from what I've read, other protesters were doing the same thing, but they weren't photographed. So this guy was photographed doing something very brave, and he wasn't alone. But it's an iconic image, and here it is again. These tanks are coming in, and this is June 21st through July 5th, right? We have the annular eclipse. It opens up, and then we see the moon move to the center, so we're tracking the moon after it. That's going to be our repeated June 21st through July 5th period. And it's at that time that we have tanks coming against this protester. So who is she? Where is this? And is this actually going to be happening on or around this time? And the answer is first, she's wearing her tiger coat. So she's going to be one of these, I think, Asian tiger nations. And we have four options of the Asian tiger nations here. We have South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore. It's probably not going to be Taiwan because tanks aren't going to very easily get there. They'd have to go by ship, and we don't have much time to get there. And there's no signs that this is happening anytime soon in Taiwan. Of course, China and Taiwan constantly are bickering about whether Taiwan is independent. China doesn't want to recognize independence in Taiwan. China doesn't want to recognize Taiwanese independence. The West has recognized it, and there's tensions there. So things could erupt between China and Taiwan, but there's no indication that's going to happen in the next month or so. South Korea, well, that could be occupied or attacked by North Korea, or even by China if something were to happen in North Korea to the president there, and China decides to occupy rather than let another ruler take charge or take over in North Korea. But that would probably not happen so soon because there's a trip line there. If you know much about what's going on in the Korean Peninsula after the Korean War, the United States left soldiers along the demilitarized zone on that border in order to basically assure the South Koreans that if anybody invades or attacks South Korea, they're going to have to kill U.S. soldiers along the way, which guarantees U.S. involvement in the war in defense of South Korea. And so that's probably not going to happen until, if it does happen, until after the U.S. suffers all sorts of terrible things and maybe is overextended militarily and pulls troops out, or maybe they just don't have the resources to support troops in this region anymore because there's so many devastating natural disasters or whatever in the U.S. or they're in other wars, right? It would take some other changes first to make it seem like an attack of South Korea is not going to be dangerous for the invading army, provoking a war with the United States. So that probably isn't going to happen in June. Singapore, of course, for China to bring tanks to Singapore, they have to go through Malaysia and other countries. And to get to the end of this peninsula, that would be a war in its own right, and that's not going to happen, not by June. And then we have, of course, Hong Kong, which already has had protests and problems for the last, for quite a while, months and maybe even a year. I don't remember when exactly they started. So those have been active. They were sort of quieted a lot during the lockdown, but they're coming back already. Look at this headline. Hong Kong is pushing a controversial national anthem bill just as protests are kicking off again. This is a news article written just a few days ago. And what we find is that as the new infections in Hong Kong have slowed to a trickle, the city is slowly getting back to normal. But as the article says, that means the protests are returning. Police arrested some 230 people on a variety of charges, including unlawful assembly and refusing to abide by social distancing regulations last weekend. So this is just a week ago. The protests are beginning again, and the police are already arresting protesters and trying to clamp down on them using the lockdown regulations in order to justify the arrests. Such disturbances are only likely to increase, according to the CNN article, with summer being the city's traditional protest season around the key anniversaries of June 4th for the Tiananmen Square massacre and July 1st, which marks Hong Kong's handover to Chinese control. So notice, when do they expect the protest season to accelerate, to get worse? Exactly when the video is representing the protests taking place and the Chinese government military coming to end those protests, right? Between June 4th and July 1st. Those are key anniversaries that are going to promote or prompt more protests. June 21st is in the middle. And so this period is a period when we should expect more protests. And if you continue, they're provoking even more. So it's not just that it's already probably going to happen. On Tuesday, the government said lawmakers will resume debate on the Chinese national anthem bill on May 27th. So just before the June 4th protests are likely to really take off, they're going to have a discussion of the Chinese national anthem bill a bill, it's a proposed law that will make it a crime punishable by up to 3 years in prison to insult the Chinese national anthem. The city, so it says here the national anthem is the Chinese national anthem, March of the Volunteers. That's the law. They're saying you cannot insult the Chinese national anthem, and they're going to put this out there and start discussing this on May 27th, just a few days before the June 4th Tiananmen Square anniversary, which will mark a beginning of a more intense protest period between June and July, which is exactly what the video is saying will happen. Now, of course, there are humans involved in this situation, right? They can plan these things, they can try to provoke it, and they can, pay some protesters to go out and do crazy things, all that sort of thing. There are ways to do that, but there's no way to guarantee you're going to get the kind of uprising that you want exactly when you want it. So we don't know how successful it will be, but it's very clear that exactly at this time, they are provoking more of it. They're letting the people sort of out of lockdown, getting them riled up. They're already going after them aggressively as though they're trying to provoke them to show them that they're going to clamp down on this, which generally provokes even worse the protests, right? Because people look at them, they say, this is absurd, and they want to go out and say, you can't do that to us, this sort of thing. And so I think we're witnessing it already happening, which tells me that her identity is, at least at the time of the June 21st this year, I think she's representing principally the Hong Kong protesters. And even if she throws up a white flag, by the time they've provoked them enough, this time it seems like China will probably have had enough and continue coming anyways, right? So the white flag isn't going to stop them this time. Last year, maybe they got close to coming in and invading or bringing in troops to declare martial law and put an end to this. But next time, if they keep it up, they're probably just going to stop it outright. So that's a really interesting thing to take note of, because that confirms that we have the June 21st eclipse correct as well, because that is the perfect timing for this to happen. Now, tanks. We have these lights. Look closely, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lights. That is 1 green to 4 red. So 1 green, 4 red. Red and green, one of the first things that should come to mind, at least does to me, of course, is stop and go. I'm not sure exactly what these mean, but I'm going to offer an idea, a suggestion. If you notice, we have the 4 stops, 4 red, 1 green. Look at the fireworks. These are the same representations, represented similarly. We have 1 big red, a second big red, a third red, and a 4th red. It's a little fainter, a lighter red at this point, but it's a red. And then we get 1 green. 1 green, 4 reds. 1 green, 4 reds. When this video was designed, of course, they clearly aimed, because of the ritual magic element, to be repetitive, going from microcosm to macrocosm and things like that. Here we have repetition, which tells me that this is important. This 5 plus 1 green and 4 reds, that is telling us something important. I'm not 100% positive what it is, but given that they repeat frequently throughout the video, I decided I'm going to think about 5s here. Are we going to have 5 and anything else before this? And I think we do. And my guess is that it's here. The shark, of course, we've seen on the board. This is a mark of the beast symbol where we have the solar principle united by the sperm or semen to the feminine principle. So we get solar and lunar here. And so that is, according to Crowley, the mark of the beast. The fundamental part of the mark of the beast element is a union of sun and moon. And the shark is representing a moon. If you move out to this scene, when you have your buck moon, what do you get? You get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 shark-like entities, okay? Now, if that's 5 moons, one of which is a little different than the other, I'm not, with the clear moon on the eye, making the eye look like a moon. We have 5, just like we have 5 fireworks, and we get 5 lights on the tanks. But we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the 5th one has a huge crater. Now we've seen that this crater also is going to represent an eclipse in the buck moon. because it has the rabbit moon in it, okay? And it's behind the doomsday clock and all of that. But you get these 5 moons before you get to the crater. My suspicion, this is a guess, I'm not positive, one possibility here is that what we have is 4 no-go months before you get a 5th month when it happens. Now, if you were to go up, so here's your crater, 4 months, 5th month crater. If we go up and look at our calendar again, we get what? July. Then after July, what do we get? 5 months. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The 5th month, a crater. So we get the July, 4 plus 1, 5, 5th month crater. It's like July happens, then you get 4 months of not yet, not yet, not yet, not yet, green. Red, 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 green. That's my guess. I'm not positive of that, but I think what we're looking at is a representation of moons or months. And so you have before he's going to fire, you're going to have before the nuclear conflict or anything big like that, 4 months of not having that, other conflicts, other things are going to be happening, and then you get the green light. Same here, 4 red, then you get a green light. Just a guess. I'm not positive of that. Now, one hypothesis that people have thrown around is that what we're looking at here is, in the fireworks, is a representation of the virus related to the pandemic. Is that right? I think it's plausible. I think because you're in a chest cavity here, the landscape is a chest cavity, I think the fact that you have this representation up here, which is viral, shape of a virus more or less, that you probably have some indication that you have something going off inside the chest, which is related to death. So that is a possibility. It isn't because of the colors. I've seen in various places that the people think that the colors are the colors of the virus. Viruses don't have color because they're too small. You can only see them under an electron microscope. The wavelength of light is too large to really be reflected off them because they're so small. They're smaller than that, and so it's impossible to have a color as a virus. And in the news and in other places, in articles and journal articles and things, they don't even use these colors all the time because they can impose any false color they want on it to clarify what we're looking at. So here, for example, here I saved a few pictures. So here the virus is yellow in this illustration, and non-viral cells or tissue are other colors, the blue and the pink. In this one, the virus is represented by red, okay, and you can see the little, I guess you call them sort of spikes or whatever on the surface of the virus, and that's why it's called a crown coronavirus. It's pointy, spiky, and to me, that looks less like the fireworks than it does like the snowflakes in the classroom. Did I have that? Yeah, those look more like the virus to me, which would also make it a part of the plan that they plan to have the virus around to bring about their plan, which I think could be depicted by this. But you see that any of different colors can be used for this virus, and you really, because viruses are so small, you never get anything clearer than a grainy image of them. So if you see something like this image, that is an artistic representation. That's not an actual image of the virus. Okay, so they don't have color, so I don't think we can make an inference from the color to the virus, which tells me that the color has other significance. Even if these do represent the virus in some ways, they are not representing it because of the color. They're representing it because of the proximity to the chest cavity and death, and perhaps shape a bit. The color is going to be related to whatever the green and red are representing in the tanks as well. And because it's a repeated sequence, the 4 and 1, 4 and 1. And I suspect, because repetition is one of the ways they accomplish things, going from microcosm to macrocosm, I suspect it has to do with months, like the sharks, okay, out there may represent months. And so that would give us our crater at the same time on that in the December month. Okay, so you get the green light in December. That's a possible interpretation. I'm not 100% sure of that. Remember that just because we have the nationality as Hong Kong now, it doesn't mean that in another time, because the video, they have applications, multiple applications, correct? For example, protests that were already happening, they are also, I think it's appropriate to say, oh, they were featured in IPET Go 2. I think they've been looking forward to that. They're working towards this. It's all part of a plan. Similarly, I think that even if we have this Hong Kong versus China protest in June and July of this year, that doesn't mean that there's not another application to a tiger nation in a year and a half or a year. And so it is possible, I think, that we could have it here in Hong Kong now, and we could have some issues with South Korea or Taiwan later, and it would be applicable. So I think that's why at the beginning of the video I said nationality or nationalities that she's representing. So let's look at our calendar. We have a calendar that goes from 2020, January, all the way through the end of 2021. It's a 2-year calendar. And when we look at it, we get to the buck moon in 2020, the June 21st eclipse to the buck moon. That period, I added a picture down here because we're going to be seeing, if they're able to accomplish what they're trying, we're going to be seeing protests and conflict near Hong Kong, in Hong Kong, between China and Hong Kong protesters. Maybe it'll even be primarily Hong Kong police against Hong Kong protesters. But if that's not able to control the situation, expect Chinese military to be involved. Okay, that is what they're after at this time, if they're able to incite the people sufficiently. Then after that, we're going to be seeing other things happening in the West and in the Middle East. In the West, of course, associated with this July birth of Harpocrates, we have all sorts of imagery in the first part of the video about the U.S., division of the U.S., the flag being torn, the water events, it looks like, earthquakes, I'm not sure, something related to Neptune retrograde. Manhattan is featured a few times. The flag, someone has pointed out, several people point out, and I think it's plausible, looks like the Texas state flag, which would make sense given the oil problems with the rain. So if we had a hurricane that starts in the Gulf of Mexico, where that pin thumbtack is on the map, and then hits the coast of Texas and has enormous amounts of rainfall and flooding and problems causing oil issues like Harvey, but worse or equal, we could see all sorts of things happening there in the U.S., as well as then conflict in the Middle East, which conflict in the Middle East, it looks like will involve Palestine, Israel, and whatever else is going to be killing Harpocrates with that attack. By December, Harpocrates is coming out. This is after ISIS's spells. Okay, so we may see a nuke or an isolated event involving nuclear weapon over in this area, but that war is going to, whatever it is that ends up killing Harpocrates and ISIS, resurrecting him, that happens around December, probably around the Grand Conjunction in December 21st. And around that same time, you have that Sagittarius eclipse, which is skullduggery's finger. It could be December 2020 or December 2021 here. But somewhere around there, you're going to have a big event. And it may be both, right? You can have one in this December, and maybe you have something else the next year. But that would be your 5 months, 4 months red light, 5th month green light, crater, like the sharks next to the school. So outside the classroom, you have the 5 sharks. The final shark is cratered, just like this. That'd be your green light month if we have the 4 reds and the 1 green. And then you have after that 2021, which could lead to the full birth of Harpocrates and RHK when they come out of the church at the very end, the scene where they come into the sunlight. Now, that timeline, we still have a question about where exactly do we want to put that ring eclipse that's in Sagittarius. Given the fact that the video does usually work with multiple layers of meaning, it's convenient that we have two places in the map that seem to be highlighted as important with those eclipses. First, we have December of 2020, which does have a crater, does line up with our 5 months, 4 months red, 1 month green, and could very well be the time that we see a nuclear event. Remember, when ISIS is casting her spell, what's going on behind her? There's a nuclear bomb that has been detonated on the cliff back there. Now, if that spell is associated with a resurrection in December, perhaps we have that nuclear blast being associated with December 2020 as well. And that may be why we have a crater here. And then add to that, we have in the China, in the Asia scene, the tank scene, the Sagittarius eclipse with the fireworks and what? Him pointing out that you're going to get nuclear problems, a nuclear war or nuclear conflict or nuclear detonation at the same possible time in December. That's I think, a pretty compelling case to think that possibly December of 2020 is when we'll see something like that happen. But that doesn't mean that we won't see more of it happen the following year. We still have the eclipse reaching out, his hand in the eclipse, reaching out and grabbing the tiger, basically, right? He reaches out and he's going to grab her shoulder on the tiger. It's like this Sagittarius eclipse is going to reach all the way to the year of the tiger, which begins February 1st, 2022. So I wouldn't be surprised if what we have here is something like a detonation that affects the Middle East or is attributed to terrorism and the ISIS group causing a terrorist attack, which accelerates a war or something. And then we actually see the Chinese involved in a war with the U.S. that goes nuclear. That news in the following year, towards the end of 2021 into 2022. That's a theory. But here's what we have, right? We have an eclipse that goes to December and December, two eclipses, one December 2020, another to December 2021. Both could be associated with nuclear events. They don't have to be the same nuclear event or in the same region or the same to the same extent. One can be more of a limited and the other more extensive, more like a your World War III image that people have. On June 21st, 2020, to the Buck Moon, we can expect them to keep pushing for more protests in Hong Kong. No clue if they'll be successful because you need people to actually cooperate, and hopefully they don't. Hopefully they're wise enough to see what's going on and what's being pushed upon them, and that they're being set up. But we'll see. These things happen. So they're going to try that. They're already trying it. They're pushing for it. They're provoking it in many ways. And we'll see the conflict in the Middle East if they're able to pull it off as well, including some issues in Israel between September and December, right? You get that little period right there, September, December. It's like a U with the Middle East trapped in it, especially Palestine. All right. I hope I've covered everything I planned to. I've tried recording this several times. I recorded it, edited the video and everything, and then I accidentally deleted it. I recorded something over it, copied over it. And so I've lost a lot of time, which is why there was a delay. Sorry about that. So like, subscribe, share the video, comment, let me know what you think, and take care.